It's often a different approach. Regions with fewer resources tend to focus more on protecting the ecosystems they still have that aren't too badly degraded yet. Smaller, community-led projects usually, trying to prevent the damage in the first place because they simply can't afford massive restoration later. It's more proactive out of necessity.
Okay, so different strategies based on resources. Where do no regret investments fit into this picture?
No regret actions are really interesting. These are things you do that make sense regardless of exactly how climate change plays out. They reduce vulnerability, boost resilience, and offer economic, social, environmental benefits. Win-win-win, basically.
Sounds ideal, so why aren't we doing them everywhere?
The big hurdle is scaling them up. It's often really hard to put a precise dollar value on all the benefits nature provides, especially the long-term ones. And getting immediate financial returns can be tricky. Traditional economic models just aren't great at capturing the full value of a healthy ecosystem.
And that value isn't just economic, is it?
Absolutely not. We can't forget the intrinsic value, nature just for its own sake, and the deep cultural significance it holds, nature as culture. It's worth protecting beyond just what services it provides us economically as part of who we are.
That's a powerful point. Which brings us neatly to co-benefits and co-interventions. You mentioned these earlier. Can you break down the difference? Why are they so important for NBS projects?
Right. So co-benefits are the extra positive outcomes you get from an NBS project beyond its main goal.
Right.
Like say you restore mangroves mainly for coastal defense. A co-benefit might be that the healthier mangrove forest boosts local fish catches or creates opportunities for ecotourism or empowers local women involved in the planting. They add extra value, make the project more attractive.
Okay, so added bonuses. What about co-interventions?
Co-interventions are different. There are separate complementary actions taken alongside the main NBS work, designed to tackle broader problems or the root causes of the environmental damage. They actively support the main NBS project's success.
Got it. So they're supporting actions, not just side effects. Can you give some examples?
Yeah, there are some really vivid ones. In Port Salut, Haiti, they were doing coastal revegetation.
Yeah.
But alongside that, the co-intervention, they introduced sustainable vetiver grass farming up on the hillsides.
Why vetiver grass?
It has amazing roots that hold the soil together. So it reduced soil erosion, which stopped sediment washing down and smothering the young coastal plants they were trying to restore. Plus, it gave vulnerable families a new source of income. It tackled a root cause and built community support.
Smart. Addressing the wider system.
Exactly. And that's key for long-term success. Another example. In Tanzania, to stop people cutting mangroves for firewood, they distributed efficient cookgos as a co-intervention, reduced pressure on the mangroves. In Djibouti, they provided solar panels as an alternative energy source, addressing the drivers of degradation.
That makes so much sense. What about the biorights concept in Indonesia? That sounded really innovative.
It is. Communities basically got loans, but these loans turned into grants if they met specific conservation targets, like restoring a certain area of mangroves.
So a direct financial incentive for conservation success.
Precisely. And it encouraged them to diversify economically, too. They started businesses making organic fertilizer from waste, processing crab shells, developing ecotourism. It linked conservation directly to economic benefit.
Brilliant. Any others?
Well, community-led oyster or mussel farming bivalve aquaculture in Mozambique, that provided alternative food and income, taking pressure off overfished wild stocks.
Right. Like we discussed with low trophic species.
Exactly. And one more, a public-private partnership in the Dominican Republic. They had a marine protected area that mostly just existed on paper, a paper park.
Not much real protection happening.
Right. But through this partnership, they turned it into a thriving entrepreneurial MPA. They developed ecotourism ventures, dive tours, coral gardening programs that tourists could participate in. It generated revenue to actually manage the park effectively, turned it from a name on a map into a real functioning protected area.
These examples really show how you can weave together ecological goals and community development. But are there downsides? Potential pitfalls with all these co-benefits and interventions?
Yes, definitely things to watch out for. Relying too heavily on one thing, like tourism, makes a project vulnerable if tourism dries up for some reason, economic downturn, pandemic, whatever. We saw that happen in some places.
Diversification is key then, even in the solutions.
It helps spread the risk, and a really critical issue is equity.
Right.
Well, if you introduce new initiatives, say a new type of aquaculture or tourism jobs, you have to be careful that everyone in the community can actually benefit. If some people lack the skills or the initial money to get started or just access, they can get left behind. You might accidentally make existing inequalities worse.
So ensuring these benefits are shared fairly is crucial.
Absolutely paramount. And tied to that is securing clear rights.
Hmm.
Who has the right to access these resources? Who has tenure? Especially in coastal and marine areas where boundaries aren't neat lines on a map like on land. Resources are often shared, sometimes contested. You need clear, fair agreements up front to avoid conflict and make sure management is truly inclusive and sustainable.
Okay, so we've seen the huge potential, the financial drivers, the importance of co-benefits and equity, but let's be realistic, implementing these complex solutions isn't easy. What are the main roadblocks, the barriers?
There are quite a few, and yeah, learning from them is vital. A big one is just coordination and communication issues.
Me.
Conflicts between different groups, maybe tourism operators wanting one thing, local fishers needing another, or just a general lack of joined-up thinking, different agencies or sectors not working together effectively.
Silos.
Pretty much. Then there are significant technical and scale challenges. It's one thing to run a successful small pilot project. It's often much harder to scale that up to a regional level effectively. Plus, we still need innovation in understanding how these restored ecosystems will function long-term, especially with climate change.
And the political side.
Always a factor. Political and institutional barriers are common. Lack of consistent political support over time, governments change, priorities shift. Legislative frameworks might be fragmented or contradictory. High staff turnover in government agencies can also disrupt long-term planning. It's hard to keep momentum.
You also mentioned potential trade-offs earlier.
Right. Sometimes focusing too much on restoring one particular species might negatively impact people who relied on something else in that area. Or sometimes the NBS intervention itself, if done badly, like dredging sand for beach nourishment or planting the wrong type of mangrove in a wrong place, can actually cause unintended environmental harm. Needs careful planning.
What about skills and knowledge?
Big one. Skill and knowledge gaps. Sometimes the local communities or even the agencies implementing the project lack the specific technical know-how. And often, we lack really good ways to measure success, the right metrics to assess the social and ecological effectiveness properly.
And funding. Always funding.
Yep. Funding and economic constraints. Not enough money or uncertain funding streams. This often leads projects to default back to cheaper, quicker, engineered gray solutions, even if NBS might be better long-term.
And finally, accountability.
Crucial. Standards and accountability. Without clear standards and good monitoring, you get the risk of greenwashing we talked about, or paper parks that aren't really managed. And linked to that, issues around transparency and corruption can undermine everything if data isn't open and processes aren't clear and fair.
Okay, that's a sobering list of challenges. But the flip side is opportunities, right? How can we overcome these?
Absolutely. For every barrier, there's usually potential solution or opportunity. Take economic and financial sustainability. Opportunities exist through private funding if it's coordinated well with public goals. Community-led income generation visitor fees, local eco-enterprises can work well. And really aligning livelihoods with conservation, like sustainable aquaculture, builds local buy-in and resilience.
And tackling those coordination and policy issues.
That needs policy integration and stakeholder engagement. We need to actively embed NBS into wider regional and national plans, not just treat them as standalone projects. Promote climate-smart marine spatial planning. Better public relations to build understanding. And crucially, set up management bodies where local people have real power, where their traditional knowledge is valued and integrated. Promoting gender equality within that is also key for fairness and effectiveness.
What about the climate and innovation angle?
Huge opportunities in climate risk management and innovation. Marine MBS, especially blue carbon ecosystems like kelp forests, seagrass, even shellfish beds, have massive potential for carbon storage that's often overlooked. We need more innovation in restoration techniques, better ways to predict how ecosystems will respond to future climate change, but always backed by solid evidence to avoid hype and greenwashing.
And ensuring we actually deliver on the environmental promises.
For biodiversity and environment, it means moving towards multi-species, multifunctional approaches, not just single-issue projects, really thorough planning before starting, rigorous monitoring during and after, and being transparent about the results, successes, and failures so everyone can learn.
So if you had to boil it down, what's the guiding principle moving forward?
It really comes down to protect what remains and restore what has been lost. That simple idea should guide everything.
And underpinning that,
strategic co-interventions to tackle root causes, aligning projects with integrated coastal policies, finding innovative and fair ways to finance it all, with transparency built in, robust long-term monitoring, and fundamentally empowering local communities through better governance.
And you mentioned something earlier about underappreciated habitats.
Yes, we absolutely cannot overlook the potential of places like kelp forests and seagrass meadows. They often get less attention than coral reefs or mangroves, but they are powerhouses for storing carbon, supporting fisheries, protecting coastlines, and potentially driving local economic development. Huge untapped potential there.
So wrapping this all up, facing these complex challenges really requires a joined-up, adaptive approach to NBS.
Exactly. Holistic, adaptive, leveraging synergies. That's how we create solutions that are resilient, effective, and actually last.
And if we manage to integrate NBS properly into wider coastal planning, paying attention to all these ecosystems, not just the famous ones.
And we can tackle immediate risks like flooding and habitat loss, sure. But more importantly, we start building genuinely sustainable, climate-resilient futures for both nature and the communities that rely on it. It's about finding that long-term balance, that harmony.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Considering this huge potential of nature-based solutions, how can we, all of us, collectively make sure their profound ecological and societal benefits are truly recognized, properly valued, and shared fairly across all communities? How do we foster that deep, transformative, long-term stewardship our coasts and oceans desperately need? Something to really think about.